Hello there, welcome to Nighttime Stories. I hope you've had a wonderful day. Now it's time to unwind. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Before you get cozy, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe. It helps bring more bedtime stories your way. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin. I don't remember exactly when I first noticed it, the feeling of being watched. At first it was subtle, an unease creeping along my spine as I walked home at night, a prickling at the back of my neck when I sat alone in my apartment. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just the natural paranoia that comes with living in a city, but deep down I knew I was lying, because it wasn't just a feeling. Little things started happening, things I couldn't explain away. My bedroom window, unlocked when I was sure I had locked it. A sticky note that I had left on my fridge for my roommate Ava, missing when I came home. A faint smell of cologne in my living room, something neither of us wore. Then there was the bouquet. It was waiting on my car one evening, deep red roses wrapped in brown paper. No note, no card, no indication of where it had come from. Ava thought it was sweet. "Maybe you have a secret admirer," she teased. "I don't get why you're so freaked out." But I was freaked out because there was something off about those flowers, the way they were placed so carefully, deliberately. Like someone had stood there for a while, waiting for me to find them. Like they knew my schedule, like they knew me. I went to the police, reported what I could. They were polite, patient, but it was clear they didn't take me seriously. "Miss Weston, it sounds like you may have a secret admirer," one officer had said, giving me an almost bored smile. I left feeling like an idiot, but I knew I wasn't imagining things, and I knew I needed help. That's when I made the post. It was late, nearly 2 a.m., and I was curled up in bed, my laptop's glow the only light in the room. My hands hovered over the keyboard, hesitating, because once I wrote it down, it would make everything real. Then, with a deep breath, I started typing. I think I'm being stalked, but no one believes me. I poured everything out, the flowers, the unlocked window, the tiny movements of my things. I wrote about how I felt like someone was watching me, tracking me. Has anyone been through something like this? What do? I hit post. Within minutes, the responses flooded in. Trust your gut. Set up cameras. Check for trackers on your car. Do not ignore this. I felt a strange kind of relief, like I wasn't alone anymore. But then, a new comment appeared. A single sentence. "You shouldn't have posted this, Clara." I froze. The username was just a random string of numbers. No profile picture, no bio. I refreshed the page. Another comment. "You shouldn't have posted this, Clara. You shouldn't have posted this, Clara. You shouldn't have posted this, Clara." 3 times. And then a picture, a grainy, low-lit image of me, sitting on my couch, inside my apartment. My lungs clenched. I scrambled backward in bed, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. I hadn't taken that picture. I had never taken that picture. Someone else had. I clapped my laptop shut, my entire body trembling. My ears were ringing. My eyes darted around the room as if expecting to see someone standing there watching me. I had been so careful, but now, he knew I knew. And I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. My hands were still shaking when I grabbed my phone and called Ava. It rang once, twice, straight to voicemail. Shit. I jumped out of bed, scanning the apartment. The air felt thick, like I was breathing in something heavy, something unseen. My heart pounded in my ears as I double-checked every lock, every window, the front door, the sliding glass door to the balcony, my bedroom window. All locked. So how the hell had someone taken that picture? My laptop was still shut, sitting on the bed like it was something toxic. I couldn't look at it. I didn't want to see the post again. Didn't want to see that comment, those words, repeating over and over. "You shouldn't have posted this, Clara." I grabbed my car keys. I needed to get out of here. The streets were eerily quiet as I drove, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced I would see headlights following me. I couldn't go to the police. They already thought I was paranoid. What was I going to tell them? Someone commented on my post with a picture of me inside my apartment. They'd laugh me out of the station. Ava. I just needed to get to Ava's place. 15 minutes later, I pulled into her apartment complex, cutting the engine. I grabbed my phone and tried calling again. Still no answer. I hurried up the stairs, knocking hard on her door. Nothing. I knocked again. Ava, it's me. Silence. My stomach twisted. Something was wrong. Then, just as I was about to knock again, the door creaked open. Ava stood there, her expression blank. I exhaled, trying to steady myself. Jesus, Ava, I've been calling you. You shouldn't have posted it. I froze. Ava's voice was flat, wrong, like she wasn't really here. I took a step back. What? Her face was eerily still, her eyes locked onto mine. You shouldn't have posted it, she repeated. A chill raced down my spine. Something was very, very wrong. I turned to run, but someone grabbed me from behind. I tried to scream, but a hand clamped over my mouth. A strong grip wrapped around my waist, yanking me back into the apartment. My feet kicked against the wooden floor, my fingers clawing at the arm holding me, but whoever it was didn't let go. Ava just stood there watching, expressionless, like she wasn't even Ava anymore. I thrashed harder, twisting in the grip, desperate to see who had me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. My vision blurred, panic choking my lungs. Then, a voice whispered against my ear, "You shouldn't have posted it, Clara." It wasn't Ava. It was him. I swung my elbow back with every ounce of strength I had. My arm collided with something solid, and the grip loosened just enough for me to tear free. I stumbled forward, spinning around. The apartment was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the floor. But no one was there. My chest rose and fell in sharp, panicked breaths. My arms trembled. I could still feel the lingering pressure where he had grabbed me, the ghost of his touch still burning against my skin. I wasn't imagining this. I turned back to Ava, my breath catching in my throat. She was still standing there, in the same exact spot, motionless. Her eyes were fixed on me, but they weren't right. They weren't hers. Something about them felt hollow, empty, like she wasn't really looking at me, like she was just waiting. My hands shook. Ava. She blinked, once, slowly. You shouldn't have posted it. A third time, the exact same words, the exact same tone. I felt sick. Something was inside her. Or someone. I took a slow step backward, keeping my eyes on her. Ava, you're scaring me. She didn't respond. I reached for my phone, fumbling with the screen, trying to call someone. My fingers felt like ice as I pressed the emergency dial. 911. The call connected. I opened my mouth to speak. And then, just as the operator's voice came through, the phone died. No warning, no battery low notification, just dead. The screen went black. I stared at it, horrified. Ava tilted her head. I turned and bolted for the door. My hands fumbled for the handle, but it wouldn't turn. The lock, the damn lock. I twisted it, throwing my weight against the door, but it didn't move. Like something on the other side was holding it shut. I slammed my fist against the wood. Help! Someone help me! No response. The apartment walls felt thinner, the air heavier, as if the whole space had been swallowed by something unseen. My own shouting sounded warped, like it wasn't really reaching beyond the walls. I turned back to Ava. She hadn't moved, but now she was smiling. It was slow, wrong, a cold, dead smile, like she was waiting for something, or someone. Then, the apartment lights flickered once, and she lurched forward. Fast. Too fast. I screamed. I dove out of the way, hitting the floor hard. Pain shot up my elbows, but I scrambled to my feet as Ava's body collapsed where I had been standing. She lay there, twitching slightly, her mouth moving like she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then, slowly, she lifted her head. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was crying. Her lips trembled as she forced out a whisper. "Clara." It was her voice this time, her real voice. "I can't," she gasped, clutching her head. "I can't make him stop." Tears streaked her face. She looked at me, terrified. And then, through shaky breaths, "He's inside my head." A cold dread coiled around my stomach. I stepped forward, my voice barely above a whisper. "Ava, what happened?" She opened her mouth, but something stopped her. Her eyes went wide, her breath hitching, and then she collapsed. I barely caught her before she hit the ground, my arms wrapping around her trembling body. I shook her gently. "Ava, Ava, wake up." Nothing. Her skin was cold. A horrible thought clawed at my mind. What if she's already gone? I pressed my fingers against her wrist, searching for a pulse. Faint, weak, but there. I let out a shaky breath, forcing myself to think. I needed help. I needed to get out of here. I reached for the door again, and this time it opened effortlessly. The hallway outside was silent, dead. I turned back to Ava, my chest heaving. I had to get her out of here. I knelt down, sliding my arms under her shoulders, getting ready to lift her. Then, something shifted in the room. I went completely still. The air grew heavy again, too thick, like something else was in here, watching. I turned my head slowly, and that's when I saw it. A shadow, standing in the corner of the room, tall, unmoving. It hadn't been there before. I couldn't see his face, but I knew who it was. My body refused to move. The only thing I could hear was my own breathing, shallow, trembling. Then, the whisper came again, so close, right next to my ear. "You shouldn't have posted it, Clara." I didn't scream. I couldn't. The air in the apartment was suffocating, pressing against me like unseen hands. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic, pounding in my ears. The shadow in the corner didn't move, but I knew it was him. Daniel Holt. I didn't know how I knew his name, but in that moment, I just did. It was as if I had always known, as if his presence had been stitched into the background of my life for longer than I realized. He had been watching me, for months, maybe years. Ava's body was limp in my arms, her breath shallow. I had to get her out, now. I didn't care if he was watching. I didn't care if he was standing right there. I moved. I threw my arm under Ava's shoulders and hauled her up. She was dead weight, her body slack, but I held her close, dragging her toward the door. My knees nearly buckled under the strain, but adrenaline pushed me forward. Footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. I didn't turn around. I reached the hallway, practically falling out of the apartment with Ava in my grip. The second we crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt normal again, like stepping out of a nightmare and into reality. But the fear was still very real. I grabbed my phone from my pocket, my fingers trembling so hard I almost dropped it. I didn't care that my phone had just died on its own minutes ago. I still tried. I pressed the emergency dial. 911. The line rang. It didn't cut off. The call went through. 911, what's your emergency? My voice came out in shaky gasps. There's a man in my friend's apartment. He attacked me. I think my friend's hurt. I need help. Stay on the line, ma'am. What's your location? I was already stumbling down the stairs, half carrying Ava as I rattled off the address. I didn't stop moving. I didn't stop to look behind me. Because I knew if I did, he would still be standing there, watching me. The police arrived in less than 5 minutes. I barely remembered the next few moments. Flashing lights, officers moving toward the apartment, paramedics taking Ava from my arms. I stood there, shaking, my entire body still buzzing with adrenaline as an officer tried to talk to me. "Miss Weston, can you tell us what happened?" I was breathless. 2 was attacked. In there he was, in there. I pointed to the open apartment door. My friend Avahe did something to her. She wasn't acting like herself. The officer nodded. "Do you know who he is?" I swallowed. I couldn't say his name. It felt too real. "I don't know." I lied. The officers swept through the apartment. They found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no shadowy figure lurking in the corners. And Ava? The paramedics said she was physically fine, no injuries, no signs of trauma. But she wouldn't wake up. I watched as they loaded her into the ambulance, my pulse still throbbing against my skin. A detective approached me, a man in his 40s, salt and pepper hair, tired eyes, Detective James Foster. He asked me to explain everything, so I did. I told him about the stalking, the post, the comment, the picture that someone took of me inside my own home. His face stayed neutral. He didn't interrupt. He just let me talk. When I finally stopped, he sighed and rubbed his jaw. "We're going to investigate," he said. "We'll go through security footage, check any cameras in the area. But I have to be honest, Miss Weston, without physical evidence, this is going to be difficult." I felt my stomach drop. "But the picture," I said, voice shaking. "It was taken inside my apartment. That's proof." Foster nodded. "Can you show it to me?" I hesitated. Then, slowly, I reached for my phone. I opened the forum, scrolling back to my post. My breath caught. The comment was gone. The picture was gone, like it had never been there at all. I stared at the empty screen, my fingers going cold. "This isn't possible," I whispered. Foster gently took my phone, scrolling through it himself. "Are you sure it was here?" "Yes," I said immediately. But I could already see it, the doubt flickering in his expression. I felt sick. I knew what this looked like. I knew how it sounded. Like I had imagined all of it. I turned to Ava, still unconscious on the stretcher. I needed her to wake up. I needed her to tell them what happened. But what if she didn't remember? What if whatever happened to her wiped it away? Foster sighed again. "I believe that you believe something is happening," he said carefully. "For now, let's get you somewhere safe. We'll assign officers to your apartment, see if anything turns up." I nodded numbly. But deep down, I already knew the truth. They wouldn't find anything, because he had been careful, and because he was still out there, watching, waiting. 2 days later, Ava woke up. She didn't remember a thing. Not me coming to her apartment, not me dragging her out, not the words she had whispered before she collapsed. "He's inside my head." She was fine, perfectly normal, no signs of harm, no lasting damage. She told the police I had probably overreacted, that she had just been really tired and maybe fainted. That's what they wrote down, and that's how the case ended. No suspect, no evidence, nothing. I stopped sleeping, stopped checking my emails, stopped looking at my phone, because I was terrified that I would see another comment. A part of me wondered if I was losing my mind, if I had imagined it all. Until one day, a letter arrived at my doorstep. No return address, no stamp, just my name on the front. I didn't want to open it, but I did. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no rambling messages. Just 3 words, written neatly in the center. "I saw you. I moved across the country 2 weeks later. New apartment, new city, new number." I deleted all my social media, changed my name on everything I could. But even now, in this new place, in this new life, I still feel it. That same feeling. That prickling at the back of my neck. That tiny, nagging certainty. That somewhere, someone is watching me. And maybe, just maybe, he's still out there. Still waiting. Still reading. The end. The highway stretched endlessly before him, 2 lanes of cracked asphalt disappearing into the mist that clung to the Pennsylvania hills. Ethan Graves tightened his grip on the steering wheel, eyes darting to the GPS mounted on his dash. Blackwood 4 miles ahead. He exhaled sharply, shifting in his seat, trying to shake the creeping unease that had been gnawing at him since he'd taken this assignment. For most of his career, he had been the guy who pulled back the curtain on superstition. He'd exposed fraudulent mediums, busted ghost hunting scams, and dismantled conspiracy theories with hard facts. The supernatural wasn't real, he'd spent years proving that. But something about Blackwood unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite define. The disappearances weren't just another unsolved case, they were uncanny. Pulling into town, Ethan felt as though he had driven into a place frozen in time. The main street was lined with brick buildings, their paint peeling, windows caked with dust. A rusted neon sign flickered dimly above what had once been a diner. A gas station on the corner displayed prices that suggested it hadn't been operational in years. There were no pedestrians, no movement. It felt abandoned, yet somehow occupied. Ethan parked outside the Blackwood Gazette, the last operating newspaper in town. According to his research, the editor Joseph Wren had been covering the disappearances for years, though no one outside of Blackwood had taken him seriously. He stepped out of his car and was immediately hit with the stillness. No wind, no distant hum of life, just silence. His boots scuffed against the cracked pavement as he walked to the newspaper's entrance. The door creaked open with a reluctant groan, and a bell above it jingled. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and ink. A single desk lamp illuminated the office, casting long shadows over stacks of yellowed newspapers. Behind the desk, Joseph Wren, a thin man with graying hair and hollow cheeks, looked up. His eyes were sunken, the kind of exhaustion that didn't come from a lack of sleep, but from years of carrying something heavy. "You the reporter?" Wren's voice was rough, as if he hadn't spoken in a while. "Ethan Graves," he introduced himself, extending a hand. Wren didn't take it. Instead, he gestured to a chair opposite his desk. "You're here about the missing people," Wren said, rubbing his jaw. "Yeah. Your articles were the only ones that took this seriously," Ethan replied, pulling out his notebook. "I've gone through them, but what I don't understand is how no one outside this town has noticed that people are just disappearing." "Because no one remembers them," Wren said quietly. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Wren exhaled sharply, leaning forward. "People disappear all the time, right? Big cities, small towns. But when someone goes missing here, it's different. Families report them missing. Then a few days later, it's like they never existed. No records, no photos, no memories." Ethan's skepticism kicked in. "That's impossible. Someone has to remember them." Wren shook his head. "I've lived here my whole life. I remember people that don't exist anymore. I have newspaper clippings of missing persons reports that no one else acknowledges. It's like Blackwood erases them." A chill crawled up Ethan's spine, but he forced himself to stay logical. "And you think this is connected to Ravenwood Psychiatric?" Wren hesitated, his fingers tapping the desk. "I don't think it is. I know it is." Ethan glanced around the office. Tacked to the walls were photographs sold, grainy black and white shots of buildings, streets, people. In several of them, he saw the same tall, faceless figure standing in the background, slightly blurred, like a smudge on the film. "Who is that?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. Wren swallowed hard. "The Hollow Man." Ethan turned to him. "You really believe in that?" Wren's jaw tightened. "I don't care what you believe, Graves. What I know is that every person who went missing, that thing was there somewhere in the last photo taken of them." Ethan stared at the figure in the photographs. The shape was unmistakable, a tall, thin silhouette in dark clothes, its head featureless. It could have been a photographic error, a trick of the light. But it was in multiple photos, spanning decades. Ethan shook off the discomfort. "Where's Lena Holloway? I was told she used to be a cop here." Wren hesitated. "She doesn't talk to reporters." "She'll talk to me," Ethan said. Wren sighed, scribbling an address on a notepad before sliding it over. "She's out past the old railway yard. If she slams the door in your face, don't take it personally." Ethan pocketed the note and stood. "One last thing. Ravenwood Psychiatric, how do I get inside?" Wren's expression darkened. "You don't. That's not going to work for me." "You don't get it," Wren snapped. "The hospital isn't just abandoned. It's wrong. You walk in and the layout changes. Hallways that go in circles. Doors that lead to places they shouldn't. People who go in alone never come back." Ethan held his gaze. "I don't believe in ghost stories." Wren leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Then you're already in trouble." Ethan left the newspaper office, stepping back into the oppressive quiet of the town. The sky had darkened with thick clouds, and the streetlights cast weak, flickering pools of light on the pavement. He climbed into his car, pulling out his phone to check the address Wren had given him. A sudden chill made the hairs on his arms stand up. He glanced at his side mirror. Down the street, Standing just beyond the reach of the dim streetlight was a figure. Tall, still, faceless. Ethan whipped his head around, looking directly down the street. Nothing was there. His breath caught in his throat. He rubbed his eyes, exhaling sharply. This town was already getting to him. He started the engine and pulled away from the curb, heading toward Lena Holloway's house. He didn't notice the static flickering across his dashboard screen. He didn't hear the whisper that crackled softly over his car radio. "Come home." Ethan drove through the outskirts of Blackwood, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The figure in the side mirror had been a trick of the light. It had to be. His brain was playing games with him, primed by the eerie silence of the town and the paranoia Wren had planted in his mind. Still, he kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the Hollow Man standing on the side of the road. The drive to Lena Holloway's house took him past rows of abandoned skeletal homes, their windows gaping like empty eye sockets. The railway yard, once a hub for the mining industry, was nothing more than rusted train cars and collapsed buildings. Time had eaten away at Blackwood, leaving behind something hollow and crumbling. Lena's house was at the edge of the yard, a small, weathered one-story home with a chain-link fence that sagged in places. A single light flickered from the front porch, casting a dull glow over the gravel driveway. Ethan pulled in and stepped out. The air smelled of damp earth and rusting metal. As he approached the house, the front door creaked open before he even had the chance to knock. Lena Holloway stood in the doorway, her posture stiff, a Glock 19 resting against her thigh. "You're the reporter," she said, her voice low and even. Ethan lifted his hands slightly. "Ethan Graves. Wren sent me." Lena studied him for a long moment before stepping back. "Come in. Keep your hands where I can see them." Ethan entered. The house was surprisingly neat, filled with bookshelves stacked with case files, newspaper clippings, and photographs pinned to corkboards. The air smelled of old paper and faint traces of gun oil. Lena locked the door behind him. She was in her late 30s, with sharp features and the weary look of someone who had seen too much. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, and she wore a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. "Let's get this straight," she said, crossing her arms. "I don't do interviews." "Good," Ethan replied, "because I don't care about a story. I care about the truth." She smirked, but there was no humor in it. "That's what I used to think too." Ethan gestured to the wall of photographs. "You were investigating a missing persons case in Blackwood, right? What happened?" Lena exhaled slowly and walked over to one of the corkboards, tapping a photo of a young woman. Amanda Hayes, 24 years old. "She disappeared in 2017, Lena said. Came to Blackwood to visit family. One night, she walked home alone after dinner with friends. Never made it back. No witnesses. No leads. It was like she just stopped existing." Ethan took a step closer. "But you didn't let it go." Lena shook her head. Something was wrong. People weren't just missing, they were erased. When I started investigating, I found out the Hollow Man wasn't just an urban legend. There was evidence. She pulled out a folder and slapped it onto the table. Ethan opened it, flipping through grainy security footage stills. In every single one, Amanda Hayes was there. And in the background, the same tall, faceless figure. It wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it was a reflection in a window. Other times, just a distorted silhouette in a shadow. But it was always there. Ethan swallowed. "You think she saw it before she vanished?" Lena nodded. She told her friends she had been having nightmares, that she heard whispers at night, then a few days later gone. Ethan flipped to another page in the folder. "What did the police say?" Lena's jaw clenched. "They stopped talking to me, started acting like Amanda never existed. Her parents? A week after she went missing, they claimed they never had a daughter." Ethan froze. "What?" "They had no memory of her. I went to their house, showed them pictures, records her birth certificate, for Christ's sake, and they looked at me like I was insane. They thought she was a stranger. Blackwood made them forget." Ethan felt his throat go dry. He wanted to argue, but Wren had said the same thing. "What happened after that?" Lena hesitated. "I kept pushing. Then, I saw him." Ethan felt a cold sensation crawl up his spine. The Hollow Man. Lena met his gaze. "Yeah. First, I started seeing things in my peripheral vision, shadows where they shouldn't be. Then my car radio started picking up whispers. One night I woke up and saw him standing at the foot of my bed. Ethan's stomach turned. What did he do? Lena's voice was barely a whisper. Nothing, he just watched. Then he was gone. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. I need to get into Ravenwood Psychiatric, he said. Lena stared at him. That's a mistake. I don't have a choice, Ethan said. That place is the center of everything. I need to see it myself. Lena's expression hardened. You're not going in alone. Before Ethan could respond, the lights flickered. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, pressing against his chest. The old television in the corner crackled to life, static hissing from the speakers. Then, a voice, distorted, hollow. Come home. Ethan and Lena both turned toward the screen. The static twisted, forming a dark silhouette. Tall, faceless, watching. Then, the screen went black. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lena grabbed her gun. We need to go, she said. Now. Ethan felt something shift inside him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he wanted the truth anymore. But it was too late to turn back now. Ethan and Lena stood frozen, staring at the darkened television screen. The air inside the small house felt thick, heavy with something unseen. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Ethan exhaled slowly, trying to rationalize what had just happened. It's just interference, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Old CRT TVs pick up random signals sometimes. Shut up. Lena's voice was sharp, edged with something close to panic. Her grip tightened on the gun in her hand, her knuckles white. She moved quickly, stepping toward the windows and checking the locks. Ethan realized that despite her hardened exterior, she was genuinely afraid. She had seen this before. You heard that, right? Ethan asked. Lena nodded once. Yeah, and we need to go. Now. Ethan hesitated. Where? Lena grabbed a duffel bag from under the couch and slung it over her shoulder. Somewhere public, somewhere with people. Ethan frowned. The town is basically a ghost town. Exactly. She moved toward the door, but something stopped her. A sound. A faint scraping outside, like footsteps on gravel. Lena raised her gun. Her eyes darted to Ethan, silently signaling him to stay quiet. He nodded, his pulse hammering in his throat. The porch light flickered. Then a shadow passed across the window. Ethan's breath caught. Someone was out there. Or something. Lena took slow, measured steps toward the front door, gesturing for Ethan to follow her lead. He did, swallowing hard, trying to control the tremor in his hands. Another scrape. Closer this time. Lena swung the door open. Nothing. The front yard was empty, the gravel driveway untouched. The only movement came from the wind stirring the trees beyond the fence line. But Ethan knew what he'd seen. There had been something outside. Lena scanned the area with sharp, practiced eyes, her finger resting just outside the trigger guard. Get in the car, she muttered. Ethan didn't argue. They hurried to his car. As Ethan slid into the driver's seat, his hands trembled against the steering wheel. Lena threw her duffel into the back and slammed the passenger door shut. Drive, she ordered. Ethan turned the key. The engine sputtered. Wouldn't start. He turned it again. Click, click, click. Nothing. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Lena's breathing hitched. She looked toward the house. The light. Ethan followed her gaze. The porch light that had been flickering before was now steady, bright, too bright. And something stood in its glow. A tall, faceless figure. Still, motionless, watching them. Lena grabbed Ethan's arm. Don't look at it. Ethan couldn't move. His brain screamed at him to turn away, but his body refused to obey. The figure was wrong in a way he couldn't fully comprehend. His mind struggled to process its existence, as if it were something that shouldn't be there at all. The porch light flickered. The figure vanished. Ethan gasped, twisting to look at Lena. What the hell was that? Lena was already reaching for his keys. She yanked them from the ignition and shoved them into his hands. Try again. Ethan's fingers fumbled as he turned the key. The engine roared to life. Go, now. Ethan slammed the car into reverse, gravel spitting under the tires. He whipped the wheel, throwing the car around before gunning it down the empty road. Neither of them spoke for several miles. The silence in the car was suffocating. Finally, Ethan dared to glance at Lena. Her jaw was clenched tight, her fingers tapping restlessly against her thigh. She was still gripping the gun. "You've seen it before," Ethan said quietly. Lena exhaled sharply. "I told you. The night Amanda Hayes disappeared, I saw it, and then it was everywhere, watching me." Ethan shook his head. "This doesn't make sense. How does a persona, whole person, just stop existing?" Lena didn't answer immediately. She stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable. "I don't think it just takes people," she finally said. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Lena hesitated. Then, in a voice so low he almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "I think it takes who they are." Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. The Hollow Man didn't just erase people, it erased their existence, their identity, their memories, their place in the world. His throat felt dry. "So what happens if we keep digging?" Lena turned to him, her expression hard. "We find out what happened at Ravenwood." Ethan nodded, staring ahead at the dark road. They had to go there. The psychiatric hospital was the key, and something inside it was still waiting. They arrived at Ravenwood just after midnight. The abandoned asylum loomed at the edge of town, its skeletal remains swallowed by overgrown weeds and twisted vines. The iron gates stood open, rusted hinges broken long ago. Ethan parked a short distance away, cutting the engine. The silence out here felt different. Not just the absence of sound, but the presence of something else, something unseen. Lena checked her gun and flashlight. "You sure about this?" Ethan asked. Lena didn't answer. She just started walking. Ethan followed, the ground crunching beneath his boots as they stepped through the gates. The front entrance was boarded up, but the side doors had been pried open long ago. A faint smell of mildew and something rotting clung to the air as they stepped inside. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing crumbling walls, peeling paint, and scattered debris. A faint hiss of static crackled through the air. Ethan turned to Lena. "Did you hear?" The door slammed shut behind them. Lena spun, gun raised. The hallway ahead of them stretched longer than it should have. Doors lined both sides, each one slightly ajar. The light above flickered. Then, somewhere deep inside the asylum, a voice echoed, "Come home." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. Lena grabbed his arm. "Run." The moment the voice echoed through the abandoned asylum, Ethan's body tensed. The two simple words "come home" crawled under his skin, wrapping around his bones like ice-cold tendrils. He didn't want to believe it was real. But the way Lena's grip tightened on his arm, the sharp edge of fear in her eye as she had heard it too. Then the lights flickered again, and the hallway shifted. Ethan's breath caught. The walls seemed to stretch, the shadows deepening, swallowing parts of the corridor in unnatural darkness. The doors, all slightly ajar before, were now wide open, and something moved inside the rooms. Lena jerked him backward. "We need to go. Now." Ethan nodded, his pulse hammering. They ran down the hallway, their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Dust kicked up around them as they sprinted, Lena's flashlight beam bouncing wildly against the walls. They turned a corner, only to find themselves facing a dead end. Ethan skidded to a stop, his chest heaving. This wasn't here before." Lena turned, scanning the area. "It's the hospital," she muttered. "It doesn't stay the same." Ethan wiped a hand over his face, trying to steady his breathing. "That's not possible." Lena gave him a hard look. "You still think this is a ghost story?" Ethan didn't answer. A soft creak echoed behind them. They turned slowly. At the end of the hall where they had just come from, a shadow stretched across the floor. Long, unmoving, watching. Ethan's fingers went numb. It was there. A tall, faceless figure standing at the entrance of the corridor. The Hollow Man. Lena raised her gun. "Don't look at it." Ethan's breathing turned shallow. "I." Lena grabbed his arm and yanked him into a nearby room. She slammed the door shut, bolting it as fast as she could. The room was small, an old patient's cell. A rusted bed frame sat in the corner, the mattress long rotted away. Scratches covered the walls, hundreds of them, deep gouges in the paint. Ethan pressed his ear to the door, listening. Silence. Then, soft footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. Lena's hands were trembling. It's hunting us. Ethan swallowed hard. His heart slammed against his ribs. The air in the room had changed, thicker, suffocating. The walls felt closer than before. Then he noticed something on the floor, a crumpled piece of paper. He bent down and picked it up. The edges were brittle, yellowed with age. Scrawled in messy handwriting were the words, "I see him everywhere. He whispers when the lights go out. He won't let me leave." A sharp bang sounded against the door. Ethan jumped back, his breath catching in his throat. Another bang. Lena raised her gun, backing toward the far wall. Then sudden silence. The air around them stilled. Ethan hesitated, then slowly reached for the door handle. Lena's eyes widened. "Don't." But Ethan yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. No sign of the hollow man, no sound, no movement, just the same dim, flickering light and the unsettling stillness that made Ethan's stomach twist. Lena exhaled shakily. "We need to get to the records room." Ethan nodded, stepping carefully into the corridor. "If this place even has one anymore." Lena gave him a grim look. "It does, but the real question is whether it'll let us find it." They moved carefully, the air in the asylum pressing against them like a living thing. The walls still seemed wrong, subtly shifting in ways that made Ethan's head ache. Then, as they turned another corner, something changed. The dust was gone. The broken furniture? Gone. Instead, the walls were clean, the floors polished, and the overhead lights were no longer flickering. It looked new. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Lena." A distant scream cut through the air. Not human. Something distorted, stretched, hollow. Then, suddenly, voices. Ethan turned. The hallway was no longer empty. There were people, doctors in white coats, nurses pushing carts, patients in hospital gowns walking down the corridor, their faces hazy, unfocused. Ethan's breath hitched. "This isn't real." Lena grabbed his wrist. "Don't talk to them." Ethan turned back. The hallway stretched endlessly now, filled with movement, with echoes of the past. And then, someone stepped forward. A man in a doctor's coat. He looked directly at Ethan and spoke. "You shouldn't be here." Lena grabbed Ethan's arm and yanked him backward. The moment she did, the lights flickered, and everything was gone. The dust returned. The hallway collapsed back into ruin, and the figures vanished. Ethan stumbled, breathing hard. His vision swam, his head pounding. Lena's voice was sharp. "We have to go." Ethan steadied himself. "What the hell was that?" Lena didn't answer. She was already moving. Ethan followed her, his skin crawling. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't just a hallucination. It was the asylum, and it was showing them something. Finally, they reached a door at the end of the hall. It was marked Records Room. Lena hesitated. "Whatever's in here, it's been hidden for a reason." Ethan swallowed and nodded. Then he grabbed the handle and pushed the door open. Inside, the room wasn't empty. Someone was already there. Sitting at the desk in the dim light of a flickering lamp was a man in a disheveled white coat. His head hung low, his fingers twitching slightly over a stack of old files. Then slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes shallow, sunken, too dark. And then he smiled. "Dr. Victor Langley," Lena whispered. "The disgraced psychiatrist. The man who had started all of this. The man who had been missing for decades. Yet somehow he was still here, and he was waiting for them." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Dr. Victor Langley sat slumped at the desk, his pale, wrinkled fingers twitching over a stack of old files. His white coat, once pristine, was now yellowed and frayed, his collar hanging loose around his gaunt neck. He was supposed to be dead, yet here he was. Lena's grip tightened around her gun, her body tense. "This isn't possible." Ethan took a slow step forward. "Dr. Langley?" The old man lifted his head. His eyes were wrong. The sockets were sunken, filled with something too dark, too deep. It was as if there was no end to them, just a void swallowing everything that had ever been human inside him. And then he smiled. "Welcome home," Langley whispered. The words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Lena raised her gun. "You're not real." Langley's head tilted slowly, like a puppet on loose strings. "Aren't I?" Ethan's heartbeat pounded against his ribs. The room felt smaller, the shadows thicker. It was as if the asylum itself was breathing, shifting around them. Langley's smile widened. "I told you," he whispered. "Once you see him, you belong to him." Ethan felt a sharp sting behind his eyes, a pressure building inside his skull, a memory that wasn't his. The asylum, the experiments. Langley had tried to erase Feartoe, push the boundaries of the human mind beyond terror itself. But instead, he had let something in. Lena suddenly fired. 3 shots. The bullets hit Langley's chest. Nothing happened. No blood, no reaction. He simply blinked, as if mildly surprised. Then, slowly, he stood up. The lights flickered violently. The room around them melted away. Ethan blinked, and suddenly they were somewhere else. A long hallway, white walls, endless. Dozens of doors lined both sides, all open. From inside each one, whispers echoed. Soft, sinister. Lena grabbed his arm. "Ethan, we're not in the asylum anymore." Ethan turned, his breath catching. Langley was gone. Instead, at the end of the hallway, something waited. Tall, faceless. The Hollow Man. Lena's breathing turned ragged. "Don't look at him." Ethan tried to move, but his legs felt heavy. The air was thick, as if something unseen was pressing down on him, rooting him in place. The Hollow Man stood motionless, but Ethan could feel him watching. Then, it moved. Not walking, not stepping, just closer. An instant ago, it had been at the end of the hallway. Now, it was only 10 feet away. The whispers grew louder. Ethan clenched his jaw. "Why is it doing this?" Lena's voice was barely a whisper. "Because it doesn't want us to leave." Ethan forced himself to look away. He grabbed Lena's wrist. "There has to be a way out." The walls trembled. The hallway warped. Doors slammed shut, one by one, until there was only one door left. Ethan didn't think. He just ran. Lena was right behind him, her gun still clenched in her hand. The air around them hummed, the whispers turning into something low and guttural. The Hollow Man was right behind them. Ethan slammed through the door. Darkness. For a moment, there was nothing. Just black, endless. Then, a voice. "You can't leave." Ethan's eyes snapped open. He was outside. The cold air hit him like a punch to the lungs. He gasped, staggering forward. The asylum gate stood before him, rusted and open. Behind him, nothing. The building was gone. Lena stumbled forward, dropping to her knees, her breathing uneven. Her hands trembled, gripping the dirt beneath her. Ethan turned to her. He swallowed. "We got out." Lena didn't respond immediately. She was staring at her own hands as if making sure she still existed. Finally, she whispered, "No one ever gets out." Ethan turned back toward the empty space where Ravenwood had stood. A week ago, there had been a building there. Now there was nothing but an overgrown field. It had erased itself, just like the people before them. Ethan's mind reeled. They had barely survived. Barely. And yet, the weight in his chest told him that something was still wrong. Something wasn't over. Lena slowly stood. "We can't stay in Blackwood." Ethan nodded. "Let's go." They climbed into the car, neither of them speaking as Ethan pulled onto the highway. The town faded into the rearview mirror, disappearing into the mist. After a few miles, Ethan finally broke the silence. "You think it's really gone?" Lena didn't answer right away. Then softly she said, "I don't think it was ever really here." Ethan's hands tightened around the wheel. Blackwood had been a trap. The asylum had been its bait. And the Hollow Man? The Hollow Man was still out there, waiting for the next person curious enough to look for him, waiting to whisper those same words. "Come home." I've always believed that life has a way of unraveling slowly, like a sweater with a loose thread. One small pull, and before you know it, the whole thing falls apart. If you had told me a year ago that my best friend would accidentally create a cult, that people would start believing in it, and that I'd end up running for my life because of something we started as a joke, I would have laughed. But here I am, and I'm not laughing anymore. It started with Samantha. She had always been the kind of person who pushed limits, the type who said the things other people were too scared to voice, who turned boredom into chaos just to see what would happen. We'd been best friends since we were kids. She was always the one who convinced me to do stupid things, climb onto the school roof, steal beers from her dad's fridge, sneak out at night to explore abandoned buildings. But this was different. She didn't mean for it to get out of hand. I have to believe that. It started as a joke, a ridiculous late-night conversation fueled by boredom and too much caffeine. We were sprawled across her bed, bathed in the glow of her laptop screen, scrolling through conspiracy forums and laughing at the wild theories people came up with. Secret societies, mind control, symbols hidden in plain sight. It was a rabbit hole we had fallen into more than once. "I bet we could make one of these," Samantha had said, grinning as she scrolled through a thread about an underground group that supposedly controlled world events. I scoffed. "What, a conspiracy theory?" "No. A cult?" I had rolled my eyes. "You mean like drink the Kool-Aid kind of cult?" She sat up, eyes glinting with mischief. "Not like a real one. Just something vague, cryptic. Something weird enough that people start talking about it. We make up a few rules, throw in some symbols, drop it into the internet, and watch what happens." It was so semantic. Always playing with fire just to see if it would burn. I should have shut it down right then and there. But instead I laughed. And that was my first mistake. The next day she was serious about it. "I already made an account," she said, holding up her phone. The profile was simple. Just a username. The Oracles Await. The banner was a grainy black and white image of a group of faceless figures standing in a circle. "No way," I said, shaking my head. She tossed her phone at me. "Read it." I skimmed the first post. It was short, just a paragraph. "We were never meant to know the truth. The oracles await those who seek beyond the veil. Watch, listen, follow the signs." "What does that even mean?" I asked. "That's the point," she said, beaming. "It sounds like it means something." It was nonsense, but it felt like something deeper, like one of those cryptic riddles you see in online scavenger hunts, designed to pull people in. Before I could argue, she was already typing out another post. "The first step is understanding that nothing is coincidence. The second step is seeing what has always been there. Step 3? You already know." She hit post before I could protest. "It's stupid," I said, tossing her phone back. She grinned. "Yeah, but stupid things get people's attention." And once again I let it slide. That was my second mistake. It started small. A few likes. A couple of comments from people who clearly thought it was some kind of ARG, alternate reality game. People loved this kind of stuff. Puzzles, cryptic messages, the thrill of thinking they were discovering something hidden. Samantha leaned into it. She started responding to comments with vague, unsettling messages. Someone would ask, "What are the oracles?" And she'd reply, "They were watching before you even asked this question." Another person wrote, "This is fake, right?" Samantha's response, "Fake is just another word for unseen." People ate it up. I watched with a mix of amusement and unease as the account grew. Hundreds of followers turned into thousands. Soon, people were arguing in the comments, trying to decode her riddles, dissecting every sentence, searching for meaning where there was none. And then the submissions started. People began sending photos, weird symbols drawn in notebooks, cryptic messages scrawled on walls, recordings of distorted voices. They weren't just following the hoax. They were becoming a part of it. That's when the first package arrived. I was at Samantha's apartment when she found it. A plain cardboard box, no return address, sitting on her doorstep like it had been left there by hand. Inside was a notebook. The pages were filled with handwritten symbols, drawings of eyes, lists of numbers arranged in strange sequences. At the very back was a note. It wasn't signed. Just a single sentence. Thank you for showing us the way. Samantha laughed. I didn't. This is getting weird, I said. She waved me off. It's harmless. I wasn't so sure, because for the first time, I started to wonder, what if someone really believes this? I started distancing myself. Samantha was obsessed now. She spent hours online, engaging with followers, dropping cryptic clues, watching as people scrambled to make sense of it all. Meanwhile, I tried to focus on real life. Work, friends, Jordan. Jordan had been patient with me. He'd listened to me ramble about the whole thing when it was still funny. But one night, as we sat on his couch, he sighed and looked me straight in the eyes. Thing with Samantha, you need to let it go, he said. It's not just a joke anymore. I wanted to believe he was wrong. But then the second package arrived. Samantha found it on my doorstep this time. Another notebook, another cryptic message. But this time, there was a Polaroid. A blurry photo of me, walking home. Taken from behind? A chill crept up my spine. This isn't funny anymore, I told her. She frowned. Elliot, I didn't send this. I believed her, which meant that someone else did. Someone who was watching. Someone who believed. And that's when I realized the oracles weren't just an idea anymore. They were real. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that Polaroid. The grainy image of me walking home, my back turned, completely unaware. It wasn't the idea of being watched that scared me the most. It was the implication. Someone had been close enough to take a picture, to follow me without me noticing. And whoever they weren't just lurking online anymore. They were here. I kept checking my phone, waiting for another post, another message, some kind of update from Samantha. But she was unusually quiet. Normally, she'd be texting me every hour with new developments, laughing about the latest weird submission someone had sent. That night, nothing. By the time morning rolled around, I was exhausted. The logical part of my brain told me I was overreacting, that this was just a stupid internet game that had gone too far. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. I needed to talk to her in person. When I got to her apartment, the door was unlocked. I hesitated, my fingers resting on the doorknob. Samantha never left her door unlocked, ever. I pushed it open. Inside, the place was a mess. Not the usual Samantha chaos of coffee cups and scattered notebooks. This was different. The couch cushions were on the floor, the desk chair knocked over. Papers were strewn everywhere. And her laptop was open. The screen was black, but when I touched the trackpad, the screen flickered to life. The browser was already pulled up to the Oracles page. And there was a new post. But it wasn't from Samantha. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting into knots. A third step is understanding that you are never in control. There was a photo attached. Of Samantha. She was sitting on her bed, staring at the camera, eyes wide, not smiling, not posing, just staring. The timestamp was from this morning. My skin prickled. I turned slowly, scanning the apartment, half expecting someone to still be here, but it was empty. The silence was so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat. I reached for my phone and dialed her number. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, but it wasn't Samantha. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, a whisper crackled through the speaker. He doesn't need this name anymore. I dropped the phone. I didn't pick it back up. I just ran. I drove straight to Jordan's apartment, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. I must have looked insane when he opened the door because his whole expression shifted. Elliot, what's wrong? I pushed past him, slamming the door behind me. She's gone. His brows furrowed. Who? Samantha. My voice came out breathless. Someone took her. Or she left. I don't know. Jordan frowned. Elliot, slow down. I shook my head. No, you don't understand. She didn't just leave. Someone was in her apartment. Someone posted from her account. And I swallowed, trying to get my thoughts straight. They answered her phone. Jordan stared at me for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked to his kitchen counter, grabbed his keys and his jacket. "Let's go." We went to the police. I told them everything. How Samantha started the Oracle's account, how people had latched onto it, how it had spiraled into something we couldn't control. I showed them the Polaroid. I showed them the message from her account, the eerie post with the timestamp after she had already gone missing. I even played them the phone call, and the officer just frowned. "She's an adult," he said. "There's no sign of a struggle. Maybe she just left." I felt like I was going to be sick. "She wouldn't leave," I said, voice sharp. "And what about the message, the phone call?" The officer sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, we'll check into it, but there's no evidence of foul play. If you hear from her, let us know." I wanted to scream, but Jordan grabbed my arm before I could. "Come on," he said under his breath. I clenched my jaw, but I followed him outside. We got back into the car, and for a long time we just sat there in silence. Then Jordan spoke. "If the cops aren't going to do anything," he said, voice steady, "then we will." We started digging. We went through every post on the Oracle's account, looking for patterns, messages, anything that stood out. And we found something. A list of numbers, buried in an old post from months ago. At first it looked random, but when Jordan ran it through a basic cipher decoder, the numbers spelled out an address. It was in a town 2 hours away. We didn't think. We just drove. The whole way there, my mind raced. Who had been following us? Was Samantha still alive? Was this even real? Or had we walked into something we didn't understand? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. The drive was eerily quiet. Neither of us spoke much, both too lost in our thoughts. The address was pulling us somewhere, but we had no idea what we were walking into. The air in the car was thick with tension. I kept glancing at Jordan, watching as his hands clenched and unclenched around the steering wheel. He was always the calm one, the rational one, but even he looked rattled. I stared out the window, my fingers drumming anxiously against my knee. The city lights faded behind us, replaced by empty highways and stretches of dark forest. The deeper we drove, the more my stomach twisted. We weren't headed toward a neighborhood or even a town. We were heading into nothingness. Finally, the GPS announced, "You have arrived." Jordan pulled the car to a stop on the side of a dirt road. No houses, no signs, just a long, winding path leading into the trees. My breath hitched. "What the hell is this?" Jordan muttered. I checked my phone. No signal. The road behind us was completely empty. Jordan turned to me. "Are we really doing this?" I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to leave. But then I thought of Samantha. If there was even a chance she was here, I couldn't just walk away. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, we are." Jordan sighed, but nodded. "All right." We got out of the car. The trees stretched tall around us, swallowing the sky, blocking out what little moonlight there was. A faint path led deeper into the woods, barely visible. My heart hammered in my chest. We followed it. The deeper we went, the colder it got. The air felt wrong, like something was pressing down on us. Neither of us spoke. Then, after what felt like forever, I saw it. A house. Not abandoned, not broken down. Just wrong. It was too ordinary, standing there in the middle of nowhere like it had no business being here. A simple, single-story home with a porch light glowing weakly in the dark. Jordan tensed beside me. "Preda ivor mundele taba. An el," he whispered. I didn't have an answer. Then I saw the car. Parked just off to the side of the house. A silver sedan, Samantha's car. My pulse spiked. "She's here," I whispered. Jordan exhaled sharply. He scanned the trees like he was expecting someone to jump out at us. No movement. No sound. Just the house. Waiting. Jordan reached into his jacket, pulling out a pocket knife. I raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you carry that?" He shot me a look. "Since my boyfriend started getting followed by a cult." "Fair enough." I took a slow breath, then stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked beneath my weight. My stomach churned. I tried the doorknob. It wasn't locked. I turned it slowly, glancing at Jordan. He nodded, gripping the knife tighter. We stepped inside. The air inside was stale. Not abandoned, but unused. The kind of stillness that clings to places where people don't live, but... Wait. A dim hallway stretched in front of us, leading to a living room. The furniture was plain, a couch, a coffee table, a television. The walls were lined with framed photographs. I glanced at one, my stomach turned. They were all the same person. A man, mid-40s, in different locations, different clothes. In one, he was standing on a beach. In another, he was sitting at a diner, smiling slightly at the camera. Jordan stepped closer, eyes scanning the faces. Who the hell is this? I didn't know. But then I noticed the paperwork on the table. An open notebook. I stepped forward, heart hammering, and picked it up. The handwriting was precise, neat. Step 1, create belief. Step 2, remove the noise. Step 3, take what was always meant to be yours. I flipped the page. That's when I saw her name. Samantha. My breath caught. There were notes beneath it. Details, dates, locations, the history of her posts, a timeline of everything she had done leading up to now. Jordan stiffened beside me. And then we heard it. A noise. Soft footsteps. From down the hall. I grabbed Jordan's wrist, eyes wide. Someone else was here. The footsteps grew louder. A shadow moved at the end of the hallway. Jordan grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the door. We turned to run. But before we could, a voice rang out. Calm, measured, too steady. You're not supposed to be here. I felt my blood run cold. The figure stepped forward into the dim light. The man, late 40s, wearing a button-down shirt, neatly tucked into his pants. And I recognized him. I had never seen him before, but I had seen his face in the pictures on the wall. Jordan tensed beside me. He was gripping his pocket knife so tightly his knuckles were white. The man took another step toward us, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come here," he said again. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. "Where's Samantha?" I forced out. A slow smile curled at the corner of his lips. "Gone." A sharp spike of terror went through me. I took a step back. Jordan moved with me, his shoulders tight. The man didn't stop us. He just tilted his head slightly, watching, studying. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said, "He left something for you." I froze. Jordan's grip on my wrist tightened. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Then, slowly, he extended it toward me. Every part of me was screaming not to take it. But my hand was moving before I could stop it. I unfolded the paper. A single sentence was written inside. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. My breath caught. It was her handwriting. A chill crept through my body. I looked up at the man, heart pounding. His expression didn't change. Jordan took a sharp breath, pulling me back toward the door. "We're leaving," he said. The man didn't stop us. He just smiled. And then, as we stepped out onto the porch, he said something that still haunts me. "She'll come back when she's ready." We didn't wait. We ran. And as we reached the car, I felt it. The weight of unseen eyes watching from the trees. Waiting. Always waiting. We drove in silence for the first 20 minutes. The only sound the steady hum of the tires against the road. I couldn't stop shaking. My fingers ached from gripping the folded note too tightly. The paper slightly crumpled now. Samantha's words burned in my mind. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Jordan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. His jaw was set, his body rigid. He hadn't said a word since we fled that house, but I could feel his tension, radiating off him in waves. Finally, he exhaled sharply, knuckles tightening even further. "We need to go to the police." I swallowed, my throat dry. "And say what?" Jordan turned to me. disbelief flashing in his eyes. Say that your best friend is missing, Elliot. Say that there's a psycho living in the woods who has a goddamn shrine of her. I clenched my fists. The cops won't care. They have to. I shook my head. They didn't before. And this isn't just some guy stalking her. This is something else. Jordan let out a bitter laugh. So what, we just forget about it? Pretend that didn't just happen? I had no answer, because I didn't know what we had just walked into. And the worst part, neither of us saw the car following us. We didn't go home. Neither of us could stomach the idea of returning to our apartments, where we'd be alone, vulnerable, where someone could be waiting in the shadows. Instead, we drove to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the walls were thin, the bedspreads were stiff, and the guy at the front desk barely looked up as he took our cash. The moment we got inside, Jordan double-locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, still gripping Samantha's note, my mind racing. Jordan ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "We need a plan," he muttered. "We need to figure out what the hell is going on." I looked up at him. "I think it's already too late." His pacing stopped. "Don't say that." I met his eyes. "Jordan, she's gone, and whatever happened to her, whoever took her, is watching us too." Jordan exhaled, running a hand over his face. He looked exhausted, his face pale under the dim motel light. After a moment, he dropped onto the bed beside me. Neither of us spoke. The weight of everything pressed down, suffocating, crushing. Then my phone buzzed. I jumped, my pulse spiking as I grabbed it. The screen lit up. A message from a blocked number. 3 words. "Check under the car." I dropped the phone like it had burned me. Jordan saw my face and grabbed it, scanning the screen. His jaw clenched. Then, without a word, he stood up and pulled the curtain aside. The motel parking lot stretched out beneath the flickering yellow light. Our car sat exactly where we left it. Empty still, no sign of anyone watching. But my stomach twisted. "Stay here," Jordan said, voice low, firm. "No way," I shot back, standing. "I'm not letting you go out there alone." Jordan clenched his jaw, but didn't argue. We left the room together. The air outside was thick, too still for the middle of the night. I kept my head on a swivel, eyes scanning the shadows, waiting for movement. Jordan crouched near the car. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as he reached underneath. His fingers brushed against something. He froze, and then he pulled it out. A small black tracking device. I stumbled back. Jesus Christ. Jordan turned the device over in his hands, his breathing sharp and uneven. "We need to go now." We didn't pack. We didn't check out. We just ran. Jordan drove, gripping the wheel so hard I thought it might snap. I kept glancing behind us, waiting for headlights, waiting for a shadow in the rearview mirror. But the road was empty. The night stretched long before us, swallowing everything behind us. "Where are we going?" I asked. Jordan didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the road, his jaw tight. "Jordan," finally he spoke. "We're finding her." My stomach clenched. "How?" Jordan's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "We're going back to the beginning." I frowned. "What does that mean?" Jordan exhaled sharply, eyes darting to me before turning back to the road. "We're going back to where it started," he said. "To the first post. The first riddle my breath caught. The oracles await." I had buried that account, tried to forget it. But I knew Jordan was right. If we wanted to understand this, if we wanted to find Samantha, we had to go back into the game. We drove through the night, chasing breadcrumbs of our own creation. The oracles await had started as a joke, a harmless game. But now it had led us here. Hunted, followed, tracked. We were going back to where it all began. Jordan pulled into an empty parking lot behind an all-night diner. The only sound was the hum of the streetlights buzzing overhead. I was exhausted, wired on fear and adrenaline. But my hands moved instinctively. I pulled out my phone and searched for the original Oracles Await page. It was still there, active. Someone had been posting. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through the latest updates. The riddles, the cryptic phrases, they weren't from Samantha anymore. Whoever had taken over the account was still playing the game. The most recent post was from 30 minutes ago. Truth is a circle. It always returns to the beginning. Attached was a photo. My breath caught. It was Samantha's car, parked in an empty lot. This lot. I scrambled out of the car so fast my legs nearly gave out. Jordan followed, cursing under his breath as he pulled me back. "Elliot, wait." I didn't listen. I ran. Across the lot, past the dumpsters, toward the car I hadn't seen in weeks but knew better than my own. The driver's door was slightly ajar. The inside was dark. Jordan caught up to me just as I reached out and yanked the door open. The car was empty, but there was a note in the driver's seat, a single line. "You were supposed to listen." My blood turned ice cold. A shuffling sound behind us. Jordan spun around. My chest tightened. There was no one there. The air was too still, the silence too full. We were being watched. Jordan's fingers tightened around my wrist. "We need to go, now." For once, I didn't argue. We backed away from the car, moving fast, scanning the shadows. My pulse pounded, my breath shallow. And then my phone buzzed, a message from a blocked number. "Stop looking, you don't want to find her." I froze. Jordan grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the car. "Elliot, we're leaving." I could barely think. My mind raced through every possibility, every outcome. Samantha was gone. Whoever had taken her was still watching us, still playing the game, and we weren't in control, not anymore. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to move. Jordan threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as we sped out of the lot. Neither of us spoke, because we both knew the truth. Samantha wasn't coming back, not unless they wanted her to, and if we kept digging, we might be next. We stopped searching after that night. The posts kept coming, more riddles, more photos of places we recognized, but we never followed them. Eventually, the updates slowed. Then, one day, the account disappeared, just like Samantha. I don't know if she's alive. I don't know if she chose this or if she was taken. All I know is that I still check my locks twice before bed, and sometimes, in the middle of the night, my phone buzzes. A message from an unknown number. I never open them because I already know what they say. The oracles await. I think my girlfriend killed someone in her sleep, and I have proof. I don't know how to start this. I guess I could say it began the night I first heard her sleep talking, but that's not really true. It started long before that. I just didn't realize it at the time. Her name is Emily, and she's perfect, or at least she was, the kind of woman you don't expect to walk into your life. Beautiful in a way that feels effortless, like she never had to try. She has this sharp, cutting wit that makes you feel like you have to keep up, like she's always 2 steps ahead. I met her at a coffee shop. It's cliché, I know, but it was one of those perfect movie moments. I was waiting for my order. She was balancing a book in one hand and a latte in the other. She nearly dropped both when I bumped into her. I apologized, offered to buy her another, and somehow, by the time we left, I had her number. It didn't take long before we were inseparable. She moved in after 6 months. It felt fast, but everything about Emily was intoxicating. You couldn't say no to her, not really. She had this way of making it seem like every decision was yours, even though, in hindsight, I think it was always hers. For a while, life was good. And then, the sleep-talking started. The first time it happened, I barely noticed. It was a little past 3 a.m. I was half awake, rolling over in bed when I heard it. A low murmur, barely more than a whisper. I thought she was talking to me at first. I mumbled something back, probably just, "Huh?" But she didn't respond. Her breathing stayed slow, steady, asleep. I told myself it was nothing. But then it kept happening, not every night, but often enough that I started noticing. Sometimes it was soft and indistinct, just meaningless sounds. Other times, she would form actual words. I remember one night, about a month in, when I actually listened. I was lying there half asleep when her voice cut through the silence. "Don't struggle." I felt my body tense. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the tone, calm, steady, like she wasn't dreaming at all. I turned my head toward her, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. Her face was completely relaxed, lips slightly parted, her breath slow and even. She was asleep. I swallowed hard and rolled onto my back, staring at the ceiling. It's just nonsense, I told myself. Dreams don't mean anything. I ignored the nagging feeling in my gut and eventually drifted back to sleep. I shouldn't have ignored it, because that was the first real warning. The talking continued for weeks, but it was always scattered. Random phrases, things I couldn't piece together. Then, one night I woke up to her laughing. It was soft, barely a chuckle, but there was something wrong about it. I turned over, my heart already racing. Her eyes were shut, her body still, but then she whispered something that made my skin crawl. I buried him deep. I stopped breathing. I must have stiffened or moved, because suddenly she rolled toward me, still completely asleep. You won't find him. A chill ran down my spine. I sat up, swallowing hard, forcing myself to breathe. It was just sleep talking, I told myself. Just nonsense. But something felt different this time. This didn't sound like a dream, it sounded like a memory. I couldn't let it go after that. I started paying attention. I bought a sleep recorder app, one of those that only activates when it detects sound. I wanted to prove to myself that it was nothing. Instead, I made it worse, because what I recorded, I wish I had never heard it.
The next morning I sat in bed, staring at my phone. My chest was tight, fingers hovering over the screen. I had spent the night recording Emily's sleep, and I wasn't sure I actually wanted to listen. The app had flagged multiple clips, small timestamps, little moments where she spoke in the dark. I swallowed hard and pressed play. At first, it was the usual, soft murmurs, indistinct words. But then, at around 2:47 a.m., her voice cut through the static. It was easy. I felt my body go rigid. The next clip autoplayed. He stopped breathing fast. My fingers clenched the phone. Another recording. A long silence, then. They always do. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the nightstand, screen still glowing. Emily stirred beside me, shifting under the covers. For the first time since I had met her, I felt afraid of her. This wasn't just sleep talking. She wasn't mumbling about work stress or bad dreams. She was talking about a person who stopped breathing, a person she had buried. I sat there, heartbeat hammering in my skull, my entire body stiff with an anxiety I couldn't shake. I needed to know if it was just crazy dreams, or if I was sleeping next to something much worse. That's when I made my second mistake. I decided to look into her past. Emily never talked much about her life before we met. Whenever I asked about her childhood, she'd deflect, shift the conversation, steer it somewhere else. At the time, I thought it was just how she was. Now it felt like a red flag I'd been too blind to see. While she was at work, I sat at my desk, laptop open, trying to piece together who she really was. Social media, barely anything. A few old photos, accounts that hadn't been updated in years. School records? Sparse. She had moved around a lot, transferred from different colleges. Nothing set off alarms, until I searched for her name alongside missing person reports. That's when I found something. A news article. A man had disappeared a few years ago in a town just outside of where Emily used to live. A man who had briefly dated someone named Emily. His name was Mark Davidson, vanished without a trace. No signs of struggle, no evidence, just gone. And the last person to see him? Emily. A weight pressed against my chest. I stared at the screen, the words blurring together, my breath coming too fast. It was probably a coincidence. It had to be. Except, the night before, Emily had whispered something in her sleep. You won't find him. I shut the laptop. For the first time, I thought about leaving, packing my things, making up an excuse, getting out before she came home. But I didn't, because I needed proof. And that was my third mistake. That night, I set up another recording. Emily curled up beside me, completely unaware, breathing slow and steady.
I forced myself to close my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I waited. Hours passed. The room was silent, except for the occasional creak of the apartment settling. Then, somewhere past 3 a.m., Emily shifted. Her breathing changed. And then, in the quiet, she spoke. "You know, don't you?" I felt my entire body lock up. She was asleep. I didn't move, didn't breathe. She rolled onto her back, eyes still shut, lips curling into something that almost looked like a smile. "It's okay." A pause. Then, "I was going to tell you soon." I felt sick. I lay there, stiff as stone, listening to her breathing even out again. She was still asleep, but I knew, right then and there, that I had to get out. I had to leave before she woke up. Because if she knew that I knew, I wouldn't get another chance. My entire body went numb. The air in the room felt thick, pressing against my skin like a weight. The only sound was the hum of the old heater and the thudding of my own pulse. Emily didn't move. She just stood there, watching me. I couldn't tell if she was waiting for me to speak or if she was waiting for me to run. She knew. She knew I had recorded her. And now I had no idea what she was going to do. I forced myself to swallow. My throat felt tight, dry. "Emily," I said, voice barely above a whisper, I just need some space. That's all." She smiled, but it wasn't real. It was careful, measured. "I get that," she murmured. "But why would you record me, Jason?" I didn't answer. Because what the hell could I say? She took another step forward. I stepped back, bumping into the door frame. The way she was looking at me now, it wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was understanding, like she had finally figured me out, and that terrified me. Emily sighed softly, glancing at the phone still glowing on the nightstand. Then, before I could react, she moved. Fast. I lunged for the phone, but she was quicker. Her fingers wrapped around it before I could reach it, and suddenly she was turning it over in her hands, scrolling through the recordings. I saw the moment she found it. Her lips parted just slightly. Her brows lifted in amusement. Then she looked back at me. "He stopped breathing fast." She read aloud. "Calm." My stomach churned. She played another clip. They always do. The room felt colder. Emily exhaled through her nose, her expression neutral. But her grip on the phone tightened. And then she laughed. Not loud, not fake. Just a quiet, genuine laugh. She lifted her gaze to mine. "You think I killed someone?" I couldn't speak. She tilted her head slightly. "That's why you've been so weird lately, isn't it?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. Emily took a slow step forward, and then she did something that made my blood turn to ice. She deleted the recording. Right in front of me. A single swipe of her thumb. Gone. I lunged, but she pulled the phone back, raising an eyebrow. "Jason," she said softly, like she was scolding a child, "you're not being very smart about this." I clenched my fists. "You had no right." "No," she interrupted. "I have every right. You recorded me while I was asleep. You invaded my privacy." She tilted her head. "If anyone should be upset, it's me." My jaw clenched. "That's not..." She took another step forward. I took another step back. Her voice softened. "What exactly do you think I've done, Jason?" I swallowed. "I saw the news article." She blinked. For a split second, something flashed behind her eyes. Then she smiled. "Ah, Mark Davidson." The air shifted. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't laughing it off. I felt a sharp chill crawl down my spine. Emily took a slow breath, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded. "Okay," she said simply. I frowned. "What?" She pocketed my phone. "If you're so sure, let's go to the police." I felt my chest tighten. She shrugged. You said you saw something, right? You think I killed him. So let's go. The room was spinning. Emily wasn't panicked. She wasn't scared. She was calling my bluff. And suddenly I realized she knows there's no proof. She had planned for this. Every part of me screamed to run, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. I forced a breath. Fine. Emily's smile widened. Great. She grabbed her keys. And we left together. The car ride was silent. Emily drove like nothing was wrong, one hand resting lazily on the wheel, the other tapping against her knee. I sat stiff beside her, my mind racing. I had to be careful. One wrong move, one wrong word, and I wouldn't make it to the station. I watched the road signs. We were headed the right way. But then, after 20 minutes of driving, Emily took a turn away from town. My chest tightened. Where are we going? I asked. She hummed. Shortcut. That was a lie. The trees thickened around us. The roads got narrower. And suddenly, I knew. She wasn't taking me to the police. She was taking me somewhere else. Somewhere no one would hear me. I had to get out, but before I could move, Emily slammed the brakes. My body lurched forward. The seatbelt locked tight across my chest. Before I could react, she turned toward me. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were dark. Jason, she murmured. I swallowed hard. What? She tilted her head. You should have stopped listening. A cold spike of fear shot through me. Then she smiled and locked the doors. The click of the lock sounded too final. My pulse jumped, a hot wave of panic spreading through my chest. I reached for the handle on instinct, but Emily's fingers wrapped around my wrist before I could touch it. Her grip wasn't tight. She wasn't hurting me, but I couldn't move. Jason, she murmured, tilting her head. Where are you going? Her voice was gentle, like we were discussing something as simple as what to have for dinner. I forced myself to keep my breathing even. You said we were going to the police. Emily's expression remained unreadable. Then she laughed softly, shaking her head. You don't actually want that, do you? Her fingers loosened, but she didn't let go. You're scared. She studied me, her dark eyes searching mine, but not of me. I didn't speak. Her fingers slipped away, and she leaned back into her seat, exhaling as she drummed her nails lightly against the steering wheel. You're scared of being wrong. I swallowed, the car suddenly feeling too small, the air too still. You think you know something? She continued, voice smooth, but you don't. You have little pieces, sure, but that's all they are. Pieces. She let the silence stretch. Then she turned her head toward me. So tell me, she said, her voice no longer soft, what exactly do you think I did? I hesitated. My stomach felt uneasy, a queasy rolling that wouldn't settle. Emily didn't blink. She was waiting. I had two options. I could lie, tell her I overreacted, that I didn't actually believe anything, that I just got spooked. Or I could say it. Say what I really thought. I wet my lips, my throat dry as sandpaper. Mark Davidson. For the first time since I'd known her, Emily stilled completely. It was subtle, but she didn't move, didn't shift, didn't breathe. And in that moment, I knew. Her fingers flexed slightly against the wheel. Then, she sighed. I was really hoping you wouldn't say that. I exhaled, trying to steady my racing thoughts. So it's true. Emily's expression didn't change. She let out a slow breath, then unlocked the doors. I hesitated. You can go, she murmured. If you really think that, Jason, if you actually, genuinely believe I killed him, get out of the car. Walk away. A trap. That's what it felt like she was testing me. The car sat in the middle of nowhere, trees towering around us, the only light coming from the headlights, casting long shadows across the road. I could step outside. I could start running. But she would still be behind me, watching. I didn't move. Emily sighed again, shaking her head. See? She smiled. You don't really believe it? She was reeling me in, twisting things. I could feel it. I forced myself to exhale. My body coiled so tightly, I felt like I might snap. "I need you to tell me the truth," I said quietly. Emily rolled her eyes. "Jason, you've already made up your mind." I swallowed hard. She studied me again, and then she reached into her jacket pocket. My heartbeat spiked, but all she pulled out was a small folded photograph. She handed it to me. I hesitated. Then cautiously, I took it. I unfolded it, fingers trembling slightly, and my stomach twisted into a knot. It was a picture of me, sleeping. The blood drained from my face. I looked up, my throat tight. Emily was smiling. "I told you," she murmured. "You were never in danger." She tilted her head. "Not until you started asking questions." My vision tunneled. The picture in my hands blurred. "Jason?" she said softly. I couldn't breathe. She leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you've always been such a good listener." Her fingers brushed mine. "Tell me." She smiled. "Are you listening now?" The weight of the photo in my hands was unbearable. A picture of me, asleep, taken from inside my own home. I could barely keep my hands from shaking. My mouth felt dry, my pulse a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. Emily was still watching me. Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, waiting, daring me to react. I had to be smart, careful. If I panicked now, I wouldn't get out of this. I forced myself to swallow, forcing the fear deep down, where she couldn't see it. "Emily," I said, my voice strained. "What is this?" She laughed softly, like I had asked her something stupidly obvious. "It's a photo, Jason." She tilted her head slightly, tapping her nails against the steering wheel. "A reminder." I forced my fingers to unclench. My mind was racing, calculating my next move. If I lunged for the door, would I make it? If I ran, how far would I get? Emily sighed, stretching her arms before turning toward me again. "You keep acting like this is some big mystery, Jason, like there's something to solve." She gestured toward the photo still clutched in my hand. "But really, you already know the answer." I took a slow breath, forcing my expression to stay neutral. "Don't let her see you unravel." "Okay," I said carefully, "and then tell me." She considered me for a moment. Then, "I don't like when people leave." A cold prickle crawled up my arms. Emily smiled. "You wouldn't leave, would you?" I could feel the walls closing in. Every exit was already blocked. I had no proof, no recordings, no way to stop her. And I had the sinking feeling that she knew it. I needed to get out. I needed to leave now. But Emily could read me too well. She must have seen the decision settle in my bones. Because the second my fingers twitched toward the door handle, she moved. Her hand shot forward, wrapping around my wrist, tight this time. Not hurting, but firm. Enough to tell me that I wasn't going anywhere. "Jason," she murmured, her fingers pressing against my pulse. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but I knew she could feel it, the erratic pounding beneath my skin. Emily sighed, tilting her head. I really hoped it wouldn't come to this. My chest tightened. She let out a breath, like she was debating something. Then she released me. I felt my shoulders tense, preparing to bolt. But then, she reached into her jacket again, and my body went completely still. I braced myself. For a knife, a gun, anything. But all she pulled out was a single, folded piece of paper. She handed it to me. "Last chance," she said. I hesitated, then slowly unfolded it. My stomach turned. It was a list of names. Some I didn't recognize, but at the very bottom, Jason Carter, my own name. My head snapped up. Emily was watching me, calmly, patiently, like she was waiting to see what I'd do next. "This isn't a threat," she murmured. My fingers tightened around the paper. She leaned in slightly. "It's a promise." The air felt too thin. My thoughts were scrambling for a way out, and then Emily sighed. "Say it, Jason," she murmured. My breath hitched. "Say what?" Her fingers brushed my wrist again, feather-light. "Say you were wrong." My mind screamed at me to lie, to say anything she wanted to hear, but my body was frozen. Emily gave me a small, knowing smile, and then she reached toward the lock. Click. She unlocked the doors. She let me go. I didn't question it. I didn't hesitate. I threw the door open and ran. I didn't stop running until I saw streetlights, until I saw cars, people, signs of life. I was shaking, breathless, my heart hammering so violently I thought I might collapse. But I didn't look back, not once, because I knew if I saw her watching me, I'd never stop running. I moved out of town the next day, changed my number, deleted social media, and for a while, nothing happened. Emily disappeared from my life as quickly as she had entered it. No calls, no messages, no signs she had ever existed at all. But I knew better. She was still out there, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, my phone buzzes. Unknown number. No message, no voicemail, just silence. Like she's reminding me. I got away. For now. But the next time I see her name, it won't be a message. It'll be a list. And I don't know if I'll get a second chance to run. Photography has never been more than a hobby for me. Some people paint, others play instruments. I take pictures. I like capturing moments that feel empty, frozen in time. Abandoned streets at dawn, forgotten alleyways, train stations just before the last departure of the night. There's something about the stillness that's always pulled me in, like I'm documenting places the world has left behind. I never took pictures of people, not intentionally anyway. I liked my photos to feel untouched, undisturbed, free of human interference. That's why, when I first noticed the man in one of my shots, I barely paid him any mind. It was a picture I had taken near the riverfront, an old cobblestone walkway lined with rusted lampposts. The sky had been a deep shade of navy, the last remnants of daylight barely clinging to the horizon. I had been focused on getting the symmetry right, the way the lampposts cast long, thin shadows stretching toward the water. It wasn't until later, when I was going through my shots, that I noticed the figure standing in the distance. He was near the edge of the frame, half hidden in the gloom beneath a flickering streetlight. A tall man, wearing a hood, his face completely obscured by shadow. His posture was off, rigid, almost unnatural, like he wasn't just passing through, but standing there deliberately, watching. I remember staring at the image for a long time, feeling vaguely unsettled, but ultimately brushing it off. People ended up in my photos all the time. That's just how it was in a city. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I saw him again. I had spent the day walking through different neighborhoods, looking for new angles, fresh places to shoot. That night, as I uploaded the day's shots onto my laptop, something stopped me cold. There he was. Different street, different time of day, same hooded figure standing just out of focus, lingering at the edge of the frame. I felt my stomach tighten. I flipped through the images again, searching, my fingers moving faster. I found another, then another. Every few shoots, there he was. I started combing through my older photos. He was there too. Not always obvious, not always in plain sight, but once I started looking, I couldn't unsee it. Sometimes he was in the background, blending into the crowd. Other times he was more isolated, standing near an alleyway, leaning against a railing, positioned behind a tree just far enough that only half his body was visible. The strangest part, the timeline didn't make sense. The first time I noticed him was weeks ago, but as I dug deeper, I found him in shots from months ago, different seasons, different locations. He had been following me for much longer than I had realized. That night, sleep was out of the question. I sat in my apartment, laptop open, heart pounding as I clicked through years of photos. The earliest one I found was from nearly 2 years ago. I had no explanation. Had he been tracking me all this time? Had I really been that oblivious? I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe it was a trick of the light, an odd angle making random passers-by look familiar. But deep down, I already knew the truth. This wasn't an accident. He was there on purpose. I stopped taking photos for a while. For weeks, my camera collected dust on my desk. I tried to act normal, like I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, scanning crowds, checking reflections in windows. But paranoia settled into my bones like an illness. Then, one night, I made a mistake. I went shooting again. I told myself I just needed closure. One last night of photos to prove to myself that he wasn't really there, that my paranoia had gotten the better of me. I stuck to busy streets, well-lit areas, places with cameras and people. I avoided isolated alleyways, stayed away from quiet corners where shadows stretched too far, and for a while, it felt normal. But when I got home and plugged in my camera, there was a photo I didn't take. My breath stalled in my chest. It was blurry, poorly framed, like the lens had been lifted and clicked at random, but the subject was unmistakable. It was me. Not a reflection, not a shadow. A photo taken from behind me, somewhere in the crowd while I had been taking pictures. Someone had been standing inches away from me, and I hadn't even known. Panic spread through me in icy waves. I scanned the photo for details, desperate for any clue, the angle, the location. It had been taken no more than an hour before I got home. Whoever took it had been close enough to reach out and touch me. I called the police that night. I told them everything, the photos, the stranger, the realization that he had been following me for years. An officer came by, took a statement, assured me they would look into it. But I could see it in their eyes. They didn't take it seriously. No real crime had been committed. No threats, no evidence beyond my own paranoia. I installed extra locks, kept my curtains shut tight, stopped going out at night, and for a few weeks, nothing happened. Then the envelope arrived. It was slipped under my apartment door while I was sleeping. No return address, no markings, just a plain white envelope containing a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken from inside my own apartment. I ran straight to the police station, envelope clutched in my shaking hands. This time they listened. Officers arrived at my apartment within minutes. They checked the locks, dusted for prints, reviewed security footage. And this time they found something. The cameras in my building had caught him. A man in a dark hoodie, waiting outside the entrance at 2:46 a.m. He never entered through the front. No sign of forced entry, no broken locks, but in one frame he could be seen slipping into the stairwell behind a tenant, walking straight toward my floor. They arrested him a week later. He had been watching me for over 3 years. He lived just a few blocks away, a man I had never met, never spoken to, never noticed in my daily life. But he had noticed me. The police found hundreds of photos in his apartment. Shots of me walking home, sitting in cafes, standing at crosswalks, flipping through books in stores. Some from months ago, some from years ago, and some from inside my apartment while I was sleeping. They asked if I wanted to see them. I said no. I haven't picked up my camera since. Because I know I wasn't the first person he watched, and I won't be the last. I used to work the late shift at Domino's, delivering pizzas until 2, sometimes 3 in the morning. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and most nights were uneventful. Drunk college kids, night shift workers, the occasional stoner who forgot they even ordered. It was all pretty routine. Then there was that night. It started like any other, the usual slow trickle of late-night orders, nothing out of the ordinary. Around 1:45 a.m., just as I was thinking about cleaning up and heading home, a last-minute order came in. 1 large pepperoni, paid in cash. The address wasn't far, somewhere on the outskirts of town, near a wooded area where houses were more spread out. I groaned, not thrilled about the idea of driving down an empty road that late, but a tip is a tip. I grabbed the box, hopped in my car, and punched the address into Google Maps. The route took me further away from civilization than I expected. Streetlights became sparse, and the houses were spaced farther apart, swallowed by darkness. I turned onto a narrow, cracked road lined with twisted, overgrown trees, their branches casting jagged shadows under my headlights. The GPS led me to a small, isolated house at the very end of the road. No lights were on. I pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching against loose gravel. The house looked abandoned. Paint peeling off the siding, a broken porch railing, weeds growing in tangled patches around the steps. I checked the ticket again. Yep, this was the address. I hesitated. Most people waiting for a pizza leave some kind of light on. A porch light, a living room lamp. Something. But this place was pitch black. I grabbed the pizza, stepped out of the car, and made my way up the creaking steps. I knocked twice, the sound too loud in the silence. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I sighed, already picturing some wasted guy passed out on the couch, forgetting he ordered. I reached for my phone to call the number on the receipt when I noticed something. The front door was slightly open. Not a lot, just a crack, barely enough to see into the house. But it had been closed when I got here, I was sure of it. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. I should have left. I should have just turned around, gone back to my car, and driven away. But something about the whole situation made me uneasy. "Hello?" I called out, pushing the door open just enough to peek inside. Darkness. Empty space. A hallway leading deeper into the house. The air smelled stale, like old wood and something slightly sour. No movement, no voices. Then, from somewhere inside, a floorboard creaked. I froze. My mind screamed at me to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. Another creak, closer this time. Then, in the dimness of the hallway, a shape moved. I didn't see details, just the faintest shift in the darkness, something tall, lurking just out of view. And then, a voice. "Come inside." Soft, hoarse, Ron. I dropped the pizza. My body finally obeyed, and I turned, bolting down the steps so fast I nearly tripped. My heart hammered as I threw myself into the driver's seat, fumbling to start the car. The headlights flicked on, illuminating the porch. The door was wide open now. I could see further inside, see more of the hallway, more of the darkness. And standing just beyond the threshold was a man, or at least something shaped like a man. He was too tall, his limbs too long, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. He stood there, completely still, just watching me. My hands shook as I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning on the gravel. As I backed away, the figure stepped forward. One slow, deliberate movement, like he was testing the air. I slammed the gas, peeling away down the road, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back. I drove straight to the Domino's parking lot, still shaking as I stumbled inside. My manager took one look at me and asked what was wrong. I told him everything. The empty house, the open door, the voice. He frowned, grabbing the store phone to call the number on the receipt. Disconnected. Then he checked the address. It didn't exist. The road, the house, nothing was there. The order had never been placed. There was no record of it in the system. I quit that night. I don't deliver anymore. But sometimes, when I'm out late, driving past dark, empty houses, I swear I see a door just slightly open, and a figure standing just beyond it, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every shadow in my room feeling too deep, too dark. My brain replayed the night over and over. The empty house, the door that had been closed, then cracked, then wide open, the voice that didn't sound quite right, and the figure, too tall, too still, watching me. But what bothered me the most wasn't the house, the order, or even the way the address didn't exist. It was the way he moved. Or rather, the way he barely moved at all. The step forward had been slow, measured, like he was waiting for something, like he knew I was watching. I tried telling myself it was a prank, some elaborate trick. But the address wasn't real, the number was disconnected, and I knew, deep in my gut, that I hadn't been meant to leave. The next day I drove back to where the house had been, or where I thought it had been. The cracked road was still there, lined with its twisting trees and jagged shadows, but at the end of the road, where the house had stood, there was nothing. No foundation, no debris, just an overgrown clearing, the weeds waist-high, swaying slightly in the wind, like no house had ever been there. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of it. Had I imagined it? Had I somehow gone to the wrong place? But I knew that wasn't true. I had parked in this exact spot. I had seen the porch, the peeling paint, the broken railing. I had seen him. A sudden, awful thought slithered into my mind. What if he's still here? I didn't stick around to find out. I left, drove straight home, locked the doors. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, I woke up to a knock at my door. It was 1:45 a.m., the exact time I had delivered that order. I sat up, heart pounding. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. No one came to my door this late. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I checked the peephole. Nothing. Just the dimly lit hallway, empty as ever. I stood there, listening, barely breathing. A full minute passed, then another. I exhaled shakily, backing away. I told myself it was nothing, just some drunk neighbor knocking on the wrong door. I turned to go back to bed. No, I froze. It was closer this time. Not at the door. At my bedroom window. I spun around, my stomach twisting violently. My apartment was 3 floors up. There was no balcony, no fire escape. There was no way anyone could be outside my window. But I heard it. And then the handle on my front door rattled. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a lamp, and backed into the corner of the room, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The doorknob twisted slowly, testing. And then silence. No more knocking, no more rattling, just nothing. For hours I sat there, frozen in fear, waiting for it to come back. I didn't sleep, I didn't move. And when the sun finally rose, spilling weak morning light into my apartment, I finally worked up the courage to check the door. It was still locked, bolted, but something was waiting for me. A single piece of paper had been slipped under the door. I picked it up with numb fingers, unfolding it slowly. There were only 5 words, written in thin, careful letters. I found you this time. I threw up. I called the police, barely able to get the words out. They arrived within minutes, checking the building, searching for any sign of an intruder. They didn't find anything. The security cameras showed no one entering or leaving my floor. There was no one in the hall, no one outside my window. They treated me like I was imagining things. I wasn't. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat up in bed, lights on, every sound making my pulse spike. I checked the door every hour. I checked the windows. Nothing. For 3 nights, nothing happened. No knocks, no notes, no rattling doorknob. And then, the 4th night, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. A text message from an unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. A photo, a picture of me, asleep in my bed, taken from inside my apartment. I ran. I didn't grab anything. I just grabbed my keys, threw open the door, and bolted down the hallway. I drove straight to my friend's place across town and stayed there for a week. When I finally went back to my apartment, it felt wrong. The air was thick, suffocating, like something was still lurking there, waiting for me to come back. But nothing happened. No more texts, no more knocks, nothing. Until last night. I had almost convinced myself it was over, that maybe somehow I had gotten away. Then, just as I was getting into bed, my phone buzzed again. Another text from an unknown number. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. It was an address. I copied it into Google Maps, heart pounding. It was a police station. My stomach twisted. What the hell was this? Then another text came through. Check the news. I hesitated, then opened my laptop, my hands shaking as I typed. The first headline stopped my heart. Breaking. Man arrested after breaking into apartment. Stalked victim for months. I clicked the article, my vision blurring as I read. The man was caught breaking into someone else's apartment last night. A neighbor had called the cops after hearing strange noises. When they arrested him, he had a knife, a lock-picking kit, and dozens of photographs. Pictures of me, taken over the past year. My blood turned to ice. Another text came through. A single message. I wasn't working alone. I stared at the screen, my pulse a roaring drum in my ears. I typed back, my hands slick with sweat. Who is this? No response. And then, a knock at my door. I didn't move. The knock at my door wasn't loud. It was soft, deliberate. The kind of knock someone does when they know you're home, when they're waiting. I gripped my phone tightly, my fingers slick with sweat, my mind racing. Whoever had been texting me knew things. Whoever had broken into my apartment had been caught. But if he had a partner, someone still out there, who the hell was at my door now? I forced myself to my feet, heart pounding as I stepped toward the peephole. My breath stalled. The hallway was empty. There was no one there. I stood frozen, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. Then my phone buzzed again. Another text. Check the camera feed. I hesitated, then slowly opened the security app on my phone. My apartment building had security cameras. One pointed at each hallway, another at the front entrance. I tapped into the hallway feed, and there he was, standing just out of frame. Not in front of my door, just to the side, in the blind spot of the peephole. Waiting? A jagged chill crawled up my spine. I watched as he stood there, motionless, his head tilted slightly toward my door. He knew. He knew I was watching. Then, the sound of police sirens. Faint at first, growing louder. My phone buzzed again. Don't open the door. I didn't. I stepped back, my pulse hammering as I listened to the sirens pull up outside the building. Heavy boots pounded up the stairs. Someone yelled commands. A door slammed open. Then, struggling, shouting. I checked the feed again, my stomach tightening. The man outside my apartment had turned. He was running, but he didn't make it far. 2 officers tackled him to the ground. More shouts, someone yelling, "We got him!" And then, just like that, it was over. I sank to the floor, my body shaking with adrenaline. The next hour was a blur. Cops at my door, questions, reports. They showed me his mugshot. A man in his 40s, hollow eyes, a sick, twisted grin. He had been watching me for months, maybe longer. But that wasn't the worst part. I asked about the first guy, the one they caught breaking into the other apartment. One of the officers shook his head. "We found his body this morning." My blood ran cold. "What?" I whispered. "Dead. Stabbed over a dozen times. Whoever did it, they wanted him gone." I stared at him, my breath coming short. If the first guy was dead, then who the hell had been texting me? Who had warned me? I never found out. The texts stopped. The unknown number was disconnected. The police called it a coincidence. I call it something else. I moved out of state after that. New city, new job, new apartment. Somewhere with no windows facing the street. Somewhere where no one knows me. But I still check my phone at night. I still glance at security cameras before opening my door. Because someone out there warned me. Someone out there was watching him too. And I can't help but wonder, what happens when they start watching me again? I always hated working the night shift. Something about the dead hours between midnight and dawn made the world feel off. The diner sat at the edge of town, perched along a lonely stretch of highway where headlights rarely passed. It was the kind of place truckers stopped when they had nowhere else to go, and drifters used as a temporary escape from the cold. The neon sign hummed outside, flickering like a heartbeat, casting a dull red glow over the empty parking lot. It was a slow night, the kind where time stretched and distorted, where minutes felt like hours and every little sound, the buzzing light, the faint hum of the fridge, the occasional groan of the wind outside, felt amplified. I leaned against the counter, absently wiping down a spotless coffee mug just to keep my hands busy. My coworker, Benny, had gone out back for a smoke break, leaving me alone with the radio's quiet drone. The clock read 2:47 a.m. That's when I noticed him. He sat in the farthest booth, by the window. I didn't hear the bell above the door chime, didn't see him walk in, but there he was, motionless, watching. The diner's dim light cast long shadows over his face, obscuring most of his features, but I could tell he was old. His skin was pale, almost gray, and deep wrinkles folded over his knuckles where his hands rested flat on the table. He didn't have a menu, didn't have a coffee in front of him, just sat there, silent, staring at nothing. A chill crawled down my spine. I tried to shake it off. Get a grip, it's just another late-night regular. I cleared my throat, grabbing my notepad as I walked toward him. "Evening, can I get you something?" No response. His eyes didn't even flicker toward me. He sat stiff, barely breathing, like a mannequin dressed in an old black suit. A faint smell clung to him. Stale, like mothballs and dust. The scent of something long forgotten. I tried again. "Sir, you doing okay?" Still nothing. Unease coiled in my gut, but I forced a polite smile. Maybe he was hard of hearing, maybe just lost in thought. I was about to walk away when his fingers twitched ever so slightly. Then, in a voice so soft I almost didn't hear it, he whispered, "Do you know what time it is?" Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. The words were deliberate, slow, each syllable dragged like a dull knife across skin. I swallowed. Just past 2:50. He didn't react. For a long, horrible moment, we just stood there. Me gripping my notepad so tightly my knuckles ached, and him sitting still as death. I told myself it was nothing, just a weird old guy passing through, maybe a little senile. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the window. The booth was empty. I spun back around, heart hammering in my chest, but he was still there, seated exactly as before, as if he hadn't moved. And yet, in the reflection, the booth held nothing but shadows. The air in the diner felt suddenly wrong, heavy, thick. A pressure built behind my ribs, like the room itself was closing in. The bell above the door rang, breaking the silence. Benny strolled back in, rubbing his arms against the cold. "Damn, it's freezing out there." He shook the rain from his jacket, glancing at me. "You good? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh, shaky and brittle. "Yeah, just weird customer." I jerked my thumb toward the booth. But when I turned back, the man was gone. The seat was empty, no coffee cup, no lingering warmth where a body had been. Just a dry, mothball-scented presence that made my skin prickle. Benny frowned. "What customer?" I felt my stomach drop. The guy who was just sitting there. "There hasn't been anyone in here all night, dude." I opened my mouth to argue, to insist I had seen him, spoken to him, but the words withered in my throat. I felt cold. And then I noticed something else. The clock above the counter still read 2:47 a.m. It hadn't moved. A thick silence settled between us. Benny frowned up at the clock, then at me, then back again. "That's weird, right?" I couldn't answer. My thoughts were scrambling, clawing for something logical, something normal to ground me. The air smelled different, like old books and damp fabric. Then, somewhere behind me, in a voice as soft as the grave, I heard it again. "You know what time it is?" My blood turned to ice. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The last customer had never left. I gripped the counter so hard my nails dug into the worn formica. Benny's face shifted, a frown settling between his brows as he glanced around, uneasy. He must have heard it too. The diner, once just another mundane, greasy little stop on the highway, now felt wrong. I swallowed hard, forcing my breath to steady. "This isn't happening." The radio crackled. A low hum, distorted static, like something trying to push through the signal. The fluorescent light above the counter flickered, buzzing in an erratic rhythm. Benny muttered a curse, glancing toward the clock. His fingers twitched, tapping against his arm as if waiting for time to move. It didn't. 2:47 a.m. Still unchanging. The temperature in the diner had dropped, not in the way it does when someone opens the door, but deeper, like the very warmth was being drained from the room. Benny shifted. His voice, usually brimming with sarcasm, was small. "Dude, are we—" A sound cut him off. Not a voice. Not static. A slow, deliberate creak, like the weight of something pressing against the floorboards. Right behind me. I didn't move. I couldn't move. My breath came shallow, my skin crawling with the electric charge of something unseen. Benny's face drained of color, his eyes locked on something over my shoulder. I swallowed. "Benny!" His mouth opened, then closed, his Adam's apple bobbed. And then, in a motion too fast to be natural, his eyes snapped to the booth. Empty. I forced myself to turn. The diner looked the same as before. Beaten vinyl booths, dull counter stools, the faint reflection of neon against the windows. But something was missing. Or maybe something had never been there to begin with. My voice came out hoarse. "We need to get out of here." Benny barely nodded before a sharp, grating screech cut through the diner. The clock. The hands had begun moving again, but backward. The second hand jerked, resisting some unseen force, fighting against the flow of time itself. It ticked, then stalled, ticked again, then slid in reverse. 2:46 a.m. The world seemed to breathe around us, stretching and distorting. My head spun, my stomach twisted in knots. The very air of the diner felt pulled thin, stretched beyond what it should be. The static on the radio rose to a high-pitched whine, and then... click. Silence. The radio died. The fluorescent lights buzzed once, then blinked out, plunging the diner into darkness except for the weak, sputtering glow of the neon sign outside. Benny cursed under his breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell is going on?" A shadow shifted near the booth. Not a trick of the light. Something moved. I grabbed Benny's wrist, gripping so tight my fingers burned. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. The neon's faint red glow outlined a shape, something that shouldn't be there. It was him, seated exactly as before, hands resting on the table, motionless. But this time his head was turned toward us. Watching, his lips curled into something that was almost a smile. I stopped breathing. The radio crackled. And then, in that same slow, deliberate whisper, he spoke. "Do you know what time it is?" The words coiled around me, slipping under my skin, into my bones. Benny was rigid beside me, his pulse a frantic rhythm against my grip. I swallowed, forcing my voice to work, forcing myself to say something, anything. It's almost 3. The smile stretched wider. Too wide. His teeth were too straight, too uniform, like they had been placed there instead of grown. The air around him blurred, warped, like heat rising from asphalt. 2:45 a.m. The hands on the clock continued to turn in reverse. Time was unraveling. My breath came short and fast, my throat dry as sandpaper. I had to move. We had to go. But Benny wasn't moving. His eyes were locked on the figure, his lips parted in silent terror. Then, in a jerky, mechanical motion, his head twitched. Once, twice, before he whispered, "I think I remember him." The diner lurched. Not the ground, not the walls, but something beneath the surface of the world itself, like reality had hiccuped, like the very fabric of existence had tilted. And then Benny let go of my hand and started walking toward the booth. Benny took a step forward. His movements were slow, dreamlike, as if he wasn't fully in control of his body. His eyes were wide but unfocused, his breath shallow. "Benny, stop." My voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight of it felt wrong in the stillness of the diner. He didn't stop. Another step. The figure in the booth remained unmoving, his face still locked in that too wide grin. The shadows around him twisted, pulsing in a way that made my stomach churn. He wasn't just sitting there anymore. He was waiting. I reached out, grabbing Benny's arm with every ounce of strength I had left. "Benny, we have to go." His body stiffened under my grip. He blinked slowly, as if waking from a deep trance, his expression shifting from blank detachment to sudden, overwhelming fear. The second he turned back toward me, the diner shifted again. A deep, gut-wrenching pull, like the air itself had been sucked out of the room. The clock above the counter jerked violently. The second hand snapped backward, ticking in rapid, erratic movements. 2:44 a.m. The man in the booth inhaled. It was slow, deliberate, the sound of something old, something tired, waking up. Then he moved. Not like a person. His body didn't shift. He didn't rise, didn't stand. He just wasn't in the booth anymore. He was closer. Too close. Right beside me. A smell filled my nostrils. Dust, decay, the faint scent of something rotting in a forgotten place. Benny gasped, yanking his arm from my grip, stumbling backward. The neon light outside flickered, and for a split second, I saw him. The customer. His skin was stretched too thin, his grin splitting his face apart, revealing teeth upon teeth upon teeth. His eyes, dark pits, bore into me, the kind of gaze that knew me, that had always known me. "Do you know what time it is?" The words slithered past me, curling in my ears, pressing into my skull. 2:43 a.m. The walls of the diner groaned, the air warped, the second hand on the clock snapped off, spinning violently before falling into the void of its face. We weren't supposed to be here. We weren't supposed to see him. Something deep inside me screamed, "Run." I grabbed Benny's wrist, yanking him so hard we nearly crashed into the counter. His feet fumbled beneath him, but I didn't stop. I shoved through the diner door, the bell's cheerful chime ringing in my ears as we stumbled into the night. The parking lot was empty. No cars, no signs of life, just the vast, dark stretch of highway that disappeared into nothing. Benny was gasping beside me, bent over, hands on his knees. I turned back to the diner and froze. The inside was dark. Not empty, not abandoned, just gone. No flickering neon, no buzzing lights, just a hollow, black void where the diner should have been. I took a shaky step forward, my breath fogging in the cold air. And then the sign above flickered. The diner snapped back into existence. Just like that. The lights were on again, the counter was clean, the booths were empty, the radio was playing some old tune from decades past. And the clock on the wall read 3:0 a.m. Time had moved forward. Benny straightened beside me, still panting. He was pale, his face glistening with sweat. What the hell was that? I shook my head, swallowing hard. I had no answer. The diner looked normal. It was as if nothing had happened. But as I turned back toward the road, one last thing caught my eye. The booth, the one at the very back. A single coffee cup sat there now, steaming as if it had just been poured. And beside it, a watch. Old. Silver. The glass cracked. And its hands? Still, frozen at 2:47 a.m. I didn't touch it. I didn't go back inside. I just walked away, Benny right beside me, neither of us daring to speak. Because we both knew the truth. The last customer had never left, and he never would. I don't really know how to start this. I've told a few close friends, but every time I do, I feel like I sound crazy. But I swear this happened. For a while, I worked as a park ranger at a remote national park. I won't say which one because, well, if you've ever heard of the missing 411 cases, you'll understand why. Most of the job was boring, checking trails, making sure campers weren't doing anything stupid, responding to the occasional lost hiker. Pretty standard stuff. But the nights were different. The park had designated campgrounds, but there were always those hardcore hikers who wanted to venture deep into the backcountry. Those were the ones we worried about. Because sometimes they didn't come back. And sometimes they called for help. This happened in late September, right before the park started shutting down for the season. I was covering the overnight shift, monitoring the radio while my partner Dave was out on patrol. It was a quiet night, until the walkie crackled. Not the main radio, but my walkie-talkie. Now, that might not seem weird, but the only people who had access to our channel were park staff. And this voice? It wasn't anyone I knew. I grabbed the walkie, holding it to my ear. The transmission was full of static, but beneath it I could hear it. A man's voice. Low, panicked. Help me. I sat up fast, my stomach twisting. Hello? This is Park Ranger Lewis. Can you repeat that? The signal was weak, garbled, like the voice was coming from far away. Then, clearer this time. Help me, please. I'm lost. I don't know where I am. I grabbed the radio, flipping to the main frequency. HQ, this is Lewis. I just got an SOS on my walkie. Do we have any hikers reported missing? There was a pause, then static. Finally, the supervisor's voice came through. Negative. No missing persons reports. I hesitated. If no one had been reported missing, who the hell was on our private channel? I switched back to the walkie. Sir, can you tell me your name, your location? Nothing. Just static. Then, deep breathing. Slow, labored. Like whoever was on the other end was hurt. It's dark. I don't know where I am. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I grabbed my flashlight, already heading for the ATV parked outside the ranger station. Okay, stay calm. Do you have any landmarks nearby? Anything you can see? For a long moment, silence. Then, why do I say you? I stopped cold. The walkie hissed with static, the signal warping, stretching, distorting. My heart hammered. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight cutting through the trees. Nothing. Just the empty ranger station, the dark woods, the distant mountains. I swallowed hard, gripping the walkie tight. What do you mean, you see me? The static spiked. Then, laughter. Low. Breathless. Not a man's voice anymore. I dropped the walkie. It hit the dirt with a dull thud, the speaker still crackling, hissing like a thing alive. I backed up toward the ATV, every instinct screaming at me to get the hell out of there. Then, just before I reached it, the walkie went silent. Not static, not breathing, just dead air, like whatever had been speaking had left. Or worse, it was never there to begin with. I didn't sleep that night. Hell, I barely breathed. I sat in the ranger station with the doors locked, the radio clutched in my hand, waiting for the voice to come back. It never did. The next morning I told my supervisor. He just gave me a look. The kind that said, drop it. I did. For the rest of my time as a ranger, I never worked the night shift alone again. But the worst part? A week later, a hiker was reported missing. When they found his body, it was deep in the woods, miles from any trail. His radio was still clutched in his frozen hands. The Rangers never released the recording, but I know what they heard, because that night, when I was all alone in the dark, I heard it too. A week after the night I heard the voice on my walkie, the missing hiker's body was found. It was a search and rescue team that discovered him, about 12 miles from the nearest trail, way off any marked paths. He was face down in a dry creek bed, body twisted like he had fallen from somewhere high. His radio was still gripped in his stiff fingers, pressed tight against his mouth like he'd died calling for help. But here's the thing. His radio? It was on our private ranger frequency. The same one that no civilian should have access to. The same one I had heard that voice on the week before. The coroner ruled it exposure and a fall injury. Said he must have gotten lost, wandered too far, slipped and broken his leg before succumbing to the cold. A tragic accident. Case closed. Except it didn't make sense. The way his body was found. There were no tracks leading to or from him. Not his, not animals, not anyone's. Like he had just appeared there. I asked to hear the final transmission on his radio, but the higher-ups wouldn't release it. Classified evidence, they said. Even to park staff. But one of the search team guys, someone I trusted, pulled me aside a few days later. His face was pale, hands shaking when he lit his cigarette. He looked me dead in the eye and said that radio was broadcasting. I swallowed. Broadcasting what? He hesitated, looking over his shoulder, then leaned in. Dead air. I frowned. What do you mean? He exhaled shakily. I mean, it was transmitting the whole time. When we found him, when we checked his radio. But there was nothing on the other end, no voice, no static, just this hollow, empty sound, like something was still listening. A chill ran down my spine. And Lewis, he continued, his voice dropped even lower. The battery was dead. I quit the job a month later. I don't go hiking anymore. And I don't ever keep a walkie-talkie in my house. Because sometimes when I'm lying in bed late at night, I swear I can still hear it. The low hum, crackling static. And just beneath it, breathing,